First of all, Jeff DeBoer, I'm the CEO of the Real Estate Roundtable. Thank you for doing this, sir. I think the basic answer to your question, why hasn't Congress done anything? There's so many competing interests here, and I think we should step back and what is the problem? If there's an affordability problem, it's probably a supply problem. So it's also a cost problem. It's also a worker problem. And so all of those things taken together add up to lower supply. I think the data would show that following the great financial crisis, a dramatic drop-off in construction, both single-family and multifamily, has occurred. So how do we correct that, and how does Congress correct that? And this is the beginning of it, I think, sir, getting people from all parts of Congress to talk about this. As I said, it's a supply problem. How do you get more supply? You need more capital into that. The low-income housing tax credit was one way to do it. There may be other ways. You have a bill to encourage the conversion of obsolete buildings into housing. That would increase supply. But keep in mind, we need people to build. And there's a shortage of labor workers now. Maybe the Judiciary Committee needs to be involved. There are programs to bring in highly skilled workers. There are programs to bring in seasonal workers. Maybe we need a program to bring in construction workers to help construct programs. Maybe the EB-5 program is a role here. I don't know, but perhaps. And so I think there's a variety of things here that need to be addressed. Sometimes banks and lenders have not been encouraged to lend on development projects. We need to address that and see what the root problems there are. But there's a variety of problems, and I think the main thing is to get all the stakeholders in the room. You know, historically there was a environmental crisis in the 70s. All committees in Congress got together on it. There was an infrastructure crisis. I'm not saying all problems have been solved, but infrastructure was dealt with in a greater sharing of views way. And housing is another one. Certainly, we agree that housing is, you know, one of the most important facets of American life. It's the most important facet of all lives, and shelter. And I think the other thing is just recognizing that while over time we all wanted to own homes, I think that there has to be a recognition that as, you know, we move forward and amenities and people are changing in what they want. Not everyone wants to be a homeowner. People want to be renters now. And so we have to accommodate all of those facets. And then the final thing on capital, I would say, is a recognition that because of the long, prolonged period of artificially low interest rates, that people were able to get mortgages at sub 3% loans. Now, as rates have risen, and maybe there will be a cut later this month, but it's not going to go back to those levels, those existing homeowners who might have moved on in the process are sort of locked into their existing homes. And so they're locked in, not freeing up those homes, and it goes up and down the chain. So I guess I would say it's a holistic problem, not just a low-income problem, which we all know about, but it's a holistic problem up and down the scale. But thank you for doing this, and look forward to working with you further on it. Thank you.
I want to touch upon something that I guess Will and Jeff and Emily kind of mentioned. One, coming here, I've been in Congress now for 8 years. I was in the fights of during Build Back Better. And what I've noticed is that, as was mentioned, there's often competing priorities of how and what gets prioritized, what will be funded, and it's a big pot. So when I was involved with Build Back Better, there was childcare, there was housing, there was just different components, and every part was a knockdown, drag-out fight. And one of the things I noticed is that afterwards, we passed it. There was a component of the low-income housing tax credit in that bill. And it was, I think it was going to create 800,000 units over 10 years, so 80,000 units a year. And at first I was like, yes. And then I realized, well, that's too small, right? And then when it finally got to the Senate, a lot of that stuff fell out. So part of it is raising housing, these programs, to a level where they don't end up on the cutting room floor. And that is a big, big part of it. So when on the next, I'm going to ask some different questions, some prepared questions, but I want to think about how do you do that? Or is it the housing crisis now so expansive that it's having more and more members talk about it? Will that be enough, or would it take something else? It's interesting you mentioned that, because my district is unique, and I'm trying to figure, is that it has so many of the different types of neighborhoods. So we have single-family homes, we have high-rises, we have a large homelessness population. We also have first-time home buyers, immigrants. So I'm always thinking about all the different components of, and that for me, it's a political necessity, but also recognizing that each one of them faces their challenges. But other members have more, I would say, homogeneous types of communities, more just suburbs, single-family homes, just dense urban area, just rural farmland. So it's or more rural communities instead of suburban. So it makes me think about how this has spread enough across the country that people are starting to recognize this. It's a problem across the board. Jeff, you talked about supply. How do you make sure that it's more supply is built in the right places and it's for the right market segments?
Wow. Well, first of all, you've done a great job on the low-income housing tax. It should be a model for all legislation of bipartisanship to get things done. It's great. And Will talked about, and I did mention supply, but even with added supply, there are going to be part of our society that can't afford that. And the rental assistance program that we have, the old Section 8, as it used to be called, program, it's capped. Maybe the volume should be increased there and expanded and made more available. The other thing on that program, on the rental assistance program, is just the way that it functions and the regulatory burdens and the timing of getting the rental assistance back into the owner's hands so that they can continue to provide the housing. And maybe it's a bad example, I don't know, but an analogy with food stamps, where grocers get reimbursed quickly on food stamps. Renter assistance, there's a time lag. And maybe that could be smoothed out that would help this affordability problem. How do you build in areas that are acutely, have an acute problem? Well, those areas probably have more heavy zoning, more heavy permitting hurdles, more difficult or voices from the so-called NIMBYism crowd. And I don't know how you smooth all of those out, except to say that I think that if you allow capital to flow more freely and have it get returns more quickly, as opposed to a long lag in their development time or holding period, I think that capital will flow where there is a need. Right now, there's probably not a need for additional housing in, say, Austin, Texas, or Dallas, and there is a need in LA or New York. So that money would flow there, that capital would flow there if that permitting and if that those zoning and if some of the other rules that we see were eased up. Because capital wants to invest, builders want to build, developers want to develop, but they're not getting the returns, they don't have the workers, the costs are too high. It's really not all that difficult to understand. It's difficult to untie that problem, but it's not difficult to spot what the problem is. I don't think you can direct, we've got to build more housing in these parts of the country and ignore the other parts of the country. I think the market will determine where the market can best allocate its resources, frankly, sir. It's interesting because one of the things that I always dealt with when I got here was people coming in always asking about the, asking for more vouchers. What percentage of our overall federal spending is on the housing voucher program?
So the housing.
It's interesting because it's. I know the voucher program is a big part of the potential solution, but oftentimes it's not well supported across the political spectrum. How would you make the arguments to somebody who's more conservative that this is part of the puzzle to actually deal with this crisis?
If I could just, in the tax bill, there's a big argument about, okay, if you provide a tax cut, does that generate economic growth? And I think in the housing area, if it shouldn't just be looked at, what are we spending on housing? What are we getting in return? In terms of additional employment, in terms of additional tax revenues, in terms of all kinds of things that come back to the economy that I think, in response to your question about how would you argue this to a more conservative member, it's not simply, spending money. You're getting a return here that's not just a society return, but a return economically that sometimes isn't talked about.
Well, that's a great point, because Ways and Means always has retreats, and we always listen to economists, and one of the economists a few years came in and talked about how the cost of housing, how much people pay per month in rent and mortgage, plus childcare, are a drag on our GDP growth itself, which for me, it blew my mind, because I never thought that it was so bad that our country's annual GDP growth is being stymied. And it makes sense when you think about it, when you take into account average families place 30% of their income towards housing and then 26% of their income towards childcare, that there's not enough money left over to invest and to spur the economy. Maybe we can team you up and you can go and talk to some folks.
Has some numbers that show that the decline in the construction of housing since the great financial crisis they've assigned a number of basis points to GDP growth. It is reasonably significant that we can get to you. But.
So we have the low-income housing tax credit. We have different ideas. We have vouchers. And I'm opening it up. Hopefully you guys don't shoot it down too bad. What do you all think about targeted federal investments through credits for first-time home buyers and building starter homes in my American Homeownership Opportunity Act? Can that help shift the market in the right direction to build more homes that are affordable, so that more people from different income levels can become homeowners?
Don't you like a simple answer? Yes. How about that? Yes, of course it can. But there's also the workforce that also needs help getting affordable and available housing. And so I don't want that to be lost on this conversation. I think it's up and down the spectrum. And I mentioned, by the way, the people who are tied into their homes with low interest mortgages. Now, this will really be controversial, but why not say it? Why couldn't you have a program where that existing homeowner might be able to take their low interest mortgage with them? And so if they're now an empty nester and they normally would move out of that home, opening up for people in a different part of the income spectrum to take that, but they're tied in now. But if they could take that low interest mortgage and apply it to a new home that more suits their needs, that would open it up. But right now they can't. And it's just one more barrier that locks up the housing marketplace. But you're obviously your low income tax credit would be helpful to that market segment, no question.
I guess, how would you, and this is for all of you, it's just kind of off the cuff, how would you structure your policy or your arguments to reinforce the others' work? I know that's not your job, but I'm kind of curious, okay, you have the Low Income Housing Tax Coalition, you have the Real Estate Roundtable, you have renters. Is there anything that could tie them together? I'm just spitballing here. I'm not a...
Yeah, well, talk about spitballing. Here's one. I mean, every bill that is done up here, or regulation, there ought to be some Uber group that it goes through that determines whether it will encourage or discourage the supply of housing, that it will encourage or discouraging capital going into housing. And I don't know what that Uber group is or how you form it, but it just seems that there should be some oversight that puts it all together. It's what the banking committee is doing. Are they helping housing or not helping housing? And somebody ought to be able to make that determination. Same on the tax bill, same on, as I mentioned, judiciary in terms of workers. And I would suggest that. I don't know how you do it. An interagency task force with the administration, I think, would make sense, and they do it on some issues. We saw it in the wetlands debate back 25, 30 years ago, where you had to go to various agencies in order to develop wetlands. And by the time you got around through all the agencies, the first agency had changed their rules, and so you had to do it again. And the government created an interagency task force on wetlands development, which set a firm definition and a firm rule there, and maybe there could be some model to be thought about there for housing.
No, thank you, and I appreciate that, because one of the things we're going to have to do is figure that path forward. Congress is structured in a way that is meant to keep things from happening quickly, and we have to get beyond that. So I know it's time for question and answers. We want to let the audience ask some question of the panelists.
Hi everybody, my name is Steve Boyle. I'm the Executive Director of YIMBY Democrats for America. So naturally, very excited that you are doing this. It's very cool to hear you talk about, housing, affordability, supply overall, and also affordability when it comes to folks in low-income situations who need more direct help. But I did think it was interesting, and I say this out of love, not as a critique, that we talked about affordability when it came to low-income folks as not a question of supply. And I think about everyone who's in the endless lines and queues and lotteries for public housing, and it makes me think, we mocked Soviet bread lines. I don't think we're off the hook because our queues are virtual. I wonder, we talk a lot about, helping the market build more housing, and Congressman Laura Friedman just submitted the Cut Red Tape for Housing Act to make it easier and faster for public housing to be built. I'm curious, to what degree does Congress have a shovel to start helping this problem and leading to this American housing boom as well as the private sector?
I don't think government-owned housing has much of a role here. I think that we tried that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and it became an isolationist policy. Low-income people were kind of treated as non-citizens and walled off, and I think that the basic approach of mixed use, mixed incomes in the rental housing area is a much more sustainable way to go forward, frankly, and to encourage that kind of thing, rather than government-owned or socially owned programs that are all for low-income people. I just don't find that appealing. Yeah, and by the way, just a footnote to what I said, I don't want to be misunderstood. I think there is a big role for the government in this, and a public-private partnership to help create this housing. I just don't think it should be all government. I think private capital, private investment, the animalistic instincts to succeed in business are what needs to be released in this area in a partnership way.
Thank you, Congressman, for doing this. CEO of Prime for Development, Arturo Snyder. We've been developing in urban communities across the U.S. for nearly 40 years. Following up a little bit on what Mr. DeBoer mentioned, that there's a possibility here to explore how commercial properties and basically the repurposing of buildings in the commercial space have such an impact on the fabric of community, where there's a massive properties that are underutilized. So the zoning issue, of course, is an issue, but also perhaps there's an opportunity for federal involvement in adaptive reuse policies and approaches for densification. We've done master planning on very large-scale projects across the United States, and it is usually exactly what was mentioned earlier, that is, when you have the mixed income and the mixed use in the community, that we see a lot of opportunity. So perhaps is there an opportunity for, from a federal perspective, to look at adaptive reuse, oversight, zoning, perhaps funding for repurposing of commercial properties, particularly in these areas where you have, as was mentioned earlier, the need for housing near the possibility to build manufacturing, and not have to do it in suburban markets where then the infrastructure and the transportation gridlock becomes a big issue. And thank you for hosting
Well,
this.
This gentleman has a bill that would do just that, and a bipartisan bill with Congressman Kerry from Columbus that would kind of build off the low-income or the historic rehab tax credit concept that would provide a tax benefit for people that own these obsolete buildings. And there are a lot of office buildings. That's the main topic, office building conversions. Obviously, you know this, but also other buildings that are obsolete. And they can either be demolished and replaced with new buildings. But keep in mind, that's quite expensive, and it also has its negative impacts on the environment when you demolish a building. You could convert a lot of buildings, and a lot of conversions have been going on, a tremendous amount, actually. But and those are the low-hanging fruit, a lot of low-hanging fruit. Now we're getting into the area, sir, where buildings that are more difficult to convert, that need a deeper subsidy, because communities are providing, whether it's tax abatements or other forms of incentives to convert, you need that other additional incentive, and the federal government could provide that to overcome the problems with existing buildings, floor plates, or the HVAC systems that need to be revamped from a building only into a residential unit only type of HVAC system, or all kinds of issues that are very, very costly that, again, a lot of low-hanging fruit. A lot of conversions have been done, and a number of members of Congress will say to me, why would you want anything more, because there are conversions going on? Well, the answer is that the tough ones are the ones that are left now and that could be, incentivized. So I would encourage the congressman to move forward as he has and get others involved in this, because it could be. And by the way, it's not just beneficial to housing. It's beneficial to cities where these vacant properties are declining in value. They're declining in property tax payments to governments, which provide some assistance to renters or what have you. And so if you put those properties back into a more productive use, you get a double or a triple bang benefit from that, and you know that well, sir.
Yeah, no, it's...
Thank you. Tom Amder, Lincoln Avenue Communities. We're one of the largest affordable housing developers in the country. One, I guess, theme that you guys didn't talk about that I'd love to have you explore a little bit more is the role of operating costs. So when I go out and develop LIHTC properties around the country, we're able to leverage more private sector finance when our operating costs are lower and be less reliant on subsidy. And one of the fastest growing, Emily knows where I'm going, one of the fastest growing parts of our operating budget is insurance, and I know this is a big issue in California, in your district in particular, sir. I'm curious how you all look at that intersection between housing affordability, insurance, and operating costs in general, and where it fits in this equation.
Well, before we wrap up, one last question. If Congress were to invest into housing and across programs, what type of investment, what's the back of the envelope number you would give me if I was, I don't want to say king because we can't say that nowadays, but if I had the power just to do it, how much would you say this is what we need? Jeff?
I don't have any idea, but I think your bill is not all that pricey in terms of conversions. I mean, I think it was scored in a relatively low number. I mean, and I think what Emily has said is right. The rental assistance is a small part of the budget. So whatever it is, it probably is a lot of money, but on a relative basis to everything else that the government spends on, probably not that high, given how important this is. I do think the question or comment on operating costs is very, very important to understand that yes, insurance costs have gone up, but so have general operating costs, electricity, maintenance, security. Everything that goes into owning and operating a building goes up and continues to go up. And so I think, that needs to be recognized in this debate, that sometimes rents go up, but they're going up because other costs are going up and the cost of operating buildings are going up. And sometimes we get distracted on other debates about how to control costs or control expenses, which get us off the topic, I think. So I don't know how much it costs but there's a lot of smart people around here that can figure that out. And if this is in fact a crisis and it is in fact an essential part of life, providing shelter for people, we ought to be able to do it.
Great.
Yeah, and I would.
Thank you. With that, gentlemen, Will Fischer, Jeff DeBoer, Emily Cadik, let's give them a round of applause.